Oh, this is policing. Welcome to the class. If you're watching this after the fact, this is 7 minutes beforehand. So feel free to move forward 7 minutes. We'll get started at 10 o'clock promptly. I will be back in just a second. I'm going to go get some markers. All the ones in here. Admit all. Boom. All right, welcome to class. I have to go get some markers. These both have met their end, their lines. So I'll see if I get some better markers. Be right back. Wait, it's the yes. Boom, boom. Cool, cool, cool. All right. 4 minutes. See, this is policing. See if this works a little better. Not really. A little better? Yes, it does. It's not as wide as I'd like, but that'll do. We will talk about stuff today. I also want to check. Update my calendar. I've not put meetings on there. Yep, that's Friday. Okay, cool. All right. Policing. Tell me what's going on in the world today. I'm trying to think of what's going on in terms of craziness. Let's see, this was chapter 12, if I remember correctly. Oh, Gardner. Evidence. That's too far. Maxfield, 9, 10. Walker, 12. That's it. pick up where we left off. Cool, cool, cool. Admit all. So we'll see how far we get. If we get through start a review. If not, we'll hold the review off for next class. I need to open this section's quiz and assignment. So I'll probably do that before tomorrow. And I always set out a deadline that's greater, at least 1 week in distance between the time it becomes available and it becomes due. So we'll talk about that. Let's see. 2 minutes. Think of other things that's been kind of going on. Let's see if I can move this around a little bit. Boop, drop that down a little bit. Not quite so much. If I zoom in, bump it up a little bit. There you go. Much more refined. A little more centered. We'll bump it over just a hair. So that way you guys can see the slideshow if you want to follow along. That way I don't necessarily have to like share screen and all that kind of stuff. We can actually get into talking things. Let's see. Funny things going on. It has been a crazy week for me. Last week was kind of crazy, but this last week was pretty funny. I found out. Let's see. I have a half sister and a half brother. Grew up with them, but apparently I hadn't been on 23andMe in some time, and we did basically I think all of us pretty much did the 23andMe thing 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, something like that. It's 5. Of course, I've since been locked out of it, so I was trying to get my access back to it again because it's just cool. But about not quite 2 weeks ago, probably less than a little over a week ago, found out new members of the family. What's this? It's like, yeah, found out apparently one of my grandfathers on my mom's side, grandfather, had like a second family no one knew anything about and kept it quiet. And it's like, whoa, what is this? Yeah, he's a liar. And that kind of a thing. Not necessarily a good thing, but not the worst thing, I guess, to have new family. Seems good people, which is always good. Good God, it's like that's crazy. Crazy world. Let's see. It is officially 10 o'clock. So got 1, 2, 3, 4 people in here. We'll give it a couple minutes. We'll see if anybody else rolls in the next minute or so. And then we'll go off into class stuff. My phone's going off. That never happens in class. Let me turn on mute. That's all right. Got one more person coming in. And we'll give it 1 more minute. Let's see here. We can get that on mute. I don't know. Yes, it did. It was already on mute. You can change the settings for text. All right. Go. All right. So let's. 10 o'clock. Looks like we have just about everybody here. In terms of things for today, I don't quite have it ready yet. I should pop it out this morning, but I woke up too late. I'm going to post out your next assignment and quiz. I'll do that hopefully within the next day, but definitely before the next class. And I'll always give you at least a week to complete it. So you won't have a huge major crush for time or anything like that. 5 of those. Quiz will follow the same kind of format we've had so far. Let's see. Where we're at in terms of exams. We'll finish out this chapter and then we'll review for the next exam. And then we're in the home stretch here. Let's see. So we'll be talking about community stuff today. I think that's where we're at. Yeah, police community relations. So this will be kind of fun. This slide in itself, I might actually share this slide for a second because that leads to a big conversation about some stuff that's really interesting whenever you think about it in terms of groups, stereotypes, and how things can change over time. So it's one of those more difficult things because as we live our lives day to day, it's the difficulties associated with just life in general, the way people will, I guess, judge you based off of the way you look, kind of thing, whether it's race or any other way. You can see the positive ways in which those things can shift over time. So it kind of take people out of the daily element of life. Because sometimes that stuff just sucks. It's like if you've ever seen anyone going through it, you ever gone through it, it's like, oh my goodness, there's nothing worse than and do stuff like that. But that's a different story for a different day. So we'll pick up with community stuff. We get through this chapter, we may start to, I don't think we'll probably get through this chapter. Let me share screen. Everything seems to be working, which is nice. And so now you can see this a little bit because it's that second bullet. Technically, it's the third bullet I really want to get into because it's one of those that's it's got a really interesting discussion behind it. And so that's where it talks about here. It's like serving many communities. Yes, every community is different. It's sort of like every encounter is different. There are elements that will be the same. There'll be some, I guess you could say, like themes is almost a good way to look at it because that's almost what you're doing whenever you fill out a police report. Is you know, figuring out the biggest issue here is like, what's the overall theme of this thing, right? What is this encounter that just happened? Same way when you're dealing with groups. That makes everything. Let's see. Where was I? We're talking about groups, communities. So it's like in the individual kind of thing with what people are used to dealing with. It's like, yeah, you kind of have an idea for how that goes and sort of like the reality of it, and then the formality associated with it. Just continuing important that kind of stuff starts to identify some of these problems. But when you start dealing with like a city itself or a neighborhood or any group, it's each group is completely different. So it's like the problems you see in one city versus another are going to be, they might have echoes that are quite similar. Maybe if that's how you want to look at it, but it won't be the same. Won't be the same song and dance exactly, right? Some movements will be in common though, and that's what you start dealing with. It'd be like dealing with sister cities. Like that's we talked about how they sometimes use comparison between organizations, this city versus this city, and then dealing with the actual problems that present themselves there. Like one city might be closer to or have a better access point for drug trafficking or something like that. It's like in the state, what the state's known for is its centrality, and because of that, boom, easy, right? And so you have to think about every area is going to be a little bit different. Its composition is going to be different. The people that they're going through is going to be a little bit different. And each, how would you put it? Well, you can kind of relate to political thing. It's like if you looked at people in a similar way as those numbers change, the issues within an area change. And so you have that aspect of it and that aspect of control. And so that's going to be baked into the system people want to use against others a lot. So now to get to the point I actually wanted to talk about, where it says understanding race and ethnicity. Race, three major biological divisions of people of the world. This is old. This is super old. Like I haven't seen this in terms of This I think the last time I saw this actually in print was from a book it was an anthropology book, I think, in the 1950s, that kind of a thing. And so here's like the major categories that they have to go: Caucasian, Negroid, and Mongoloid, right? And it's like, ooh, you can pick up on those racist elements of that from that time frame, and that's technically that's within education too. And so it'd be like talking about the biological theories within criminal justice and their major flaws and how it was being used, kind of things. Not good. But what I really want to focus in on is that last one, Mongol, because that one's really, really, really interesting if you deal with it. If you've ever encountered it in the real world with people, I don't think it's not common anymore. But if you were to go back to a point in time where racism was actually more prevalent, it's like you might actually encounter that word being used in a way. The worst one I ever heard was someone's being referred to as a Mongoloid mother, something like that, right? What it was that they were trying to say, and this is what's the funny part is. Here. So that root, what are you trying to? What is it? Anthropologically speaking, what they try to do is they try to delineate the people out into three different groups of people. But it's just different places and how people respond to the environments. But that's a different conversation. This one is about basically continents in which people were classified into, I guess, races or groups. If you look at people, you can make it make sense like that. So, like if you're looking out at the night sky, it's like we're the center of the universe. That's like, but this one was basically of Asian descent, right? So you have Caucasian would be Europe, Negroid would be Africa, I guess, and that's that area, and then Mongoloid is, I guess you'd say, Asia. It's like, okay, what about all the places in between? People. It's like trying to make sense of it's really hard to really do it at scale and really think of it. But this one's really funny because whenever people would use it, what they're trying to say is they're using a term to say someone's basically unevolved, something of that nature, right? And so if you think about this, it's like you're talking about people from what regions and what were the historic stereotypes associated with it. And it's this one's really, really interesting because of the fact it's one, you're dealing with what would you say? It's opium in general, because it was literally opium, not opioids. Whenever you had Chinese influx here in this country, you start to see more use of this in the social side kind of thing. It's kind of it's funny because when you look at the Chinese group when they came in, basically any Asian was classified the same way. Opium addicts, that kind of a thing. Poor workers, that kind of those types of stereotypes were common. This is kind of tied in with that to some degree. Also, and where we got also tied into the negative stereotypes is eyes and Down syndrome. You know, I don't think it does Down syndrome, right? And so with that, when you have a characteristic of the eye features, it's somewhat common with I wouldn't say common. It's like has some characteristics which somewhat align with people of Asian descent, the wider, narrower eyes kind of thing. And so huge negative aspect associated with it, right? Associated with an entire group of people. And basically what ends up happening from there is if you look at the group Asians as a group now and the stereotypes associated with it, it's hilarious because what is it we say now? It's like we start talking about things like math skills, right? And so it's like those things change. They can change. It's just that's that time element of it. And then realize that no matter what happens, you'll always have that element of people that want to do this in a negative direction. I'm trying to read what it says. Scientific terms derived from they're just observable differences. Basically, what they did is exactly that. It's anthropology. Going through and classifying people as in their movements, trying to identify clear, distinct points at which people diverge. And so basically look at the continents of Africa, you look at the continents of Europe, and then you look at the continents of Asia, so where things spread out. And so those are the original kind of things that try to say, here's a distinct point here, here's a distinct point here, here's a distinct point here. Not necessarily how it works, though. It's sort of like kind of a bad parallel because it's just a bad parallel. It'd be like telling you about dissecting an animal in biology, right? You've ever done that whenever you open up like a little frog or something like that. You can tell where the intestines are, but to tell the difference of when it moves from small to large intestine, it's like, are those really two different things? Everything's all connected. What's the difference between this membrane here and this membrane there? It's like, is there a real difference there? Biologists kind of a little bit clearer when you're after you've done it enough. Realize that that's almost a century ago in anthropology, and so some ways it's kind of a new way of looking at trying to account for it. And so really, really unrefined, really outdated now. And basically, yeah, that's what you look at. It's just like here's what I see. I'm trying to take out, my own biases to some degree if you really get into the research side of things and make those lines, but it's really, really hard to do. It really is. Um, but yeah, that's all. It's just really fun to see it across time because when you see it across time, you understand it's like, good golly, humanity. That's humanity right there. What is it? We're going to deal with people in a harmful way, kind of mistreat them. And over time, if things move in just a positive enough way, maybe it can change in some way, but we're still going to make fun of it for it. It's like, that's people for you. What if that's not people? That's one of my favorite lessons about race and should say race, more like culture, that kind of stuff, because that's how people always do. That'd be like having a conversation with you all. I think I mentioned this in one of the previous classes in here. I think I may not have. Probably if you really get like the sociology, anthropology kind of stuff, if you really get into it, it's tribes, which is kind of not, I wouldn't say fun. You guys will probably have an easier time relating to it because of this being the area that it is. Tribes, if you look at tribes, one, it's largely you're talking about families is where those types of groups start. And then from there, it's look at their names. Because what you'll see is a few different names that are recurrent repeatedly across tribes, across time. And that's their name. And that's probably the most interesting because if you look at the names for themselves, there's a few implications there. Because you'll see two big patterns. They kind of run the same way. Typically, people, what they'll do is they'll name themselves after the area, or they'll use whatever word it is in their language for people. And so it's like, I'm a person. This is our group of people. Everything that's not one of our people are not people, or they're dangerous, or they're a potential danger at minimum, right? Unless you got some communication between those tribes, and then that's at which point you start to build those relationships. And those things don't always start out positively. They can move in a positive direction. They don't have to. Right? You're just dealing with people at scale. But the thing about people is really interesting because, well, look at all the different ways we use the word people, what it represents. Largely represents power. Ethnicity, whenever you talk about ethnicity, it mentions cultural differences. It's like language, religion, family patterns, moves away, separate race from category. Okay, here it mentions official data. While we track those things, many use old racial categories of white, non-white, majority, minority, or what's it say here, black, white kind of thing. That's because of the way those numbers parse out. It's really, really easy to run dichotomies in terms of running data analyses, that kind of stuff. The ease at which to track this is much easier than some of those other ones. So that's the reasons why. But when you get into race, as in terms of categories and ethnicity, probably the biggest thing is here cultural differences, language, religion, family, principle. Talking about Hispanic culture, right? That's what you're talking about with this one. The definition they get here would be more inclusive, would be more complicated, and eventually, if it parses out fully, what it would do is it would be the equivalent to race, but across culture, right? And so, the history of this. Hispanic was essentially just another racial category for I don't know how long, right? And so basically, what happened there is on one side of the spectrum, like on the analytical side, tracking numbers, you want to be able to identify, well, is this person what racial category? What racial categories? There you go. Most people fall into many, right? It's like saying, is this person really white? I mentioned that 23andMe thing earlier today. That was kind of funny. Coincidental. Came in late to class, basically what I found out in the last couple of weeks. I have a new aunt and maybe two. My mom's dad. Apparently, he was not the. I don't know how I want to put that. I don't like that. I would judge him harshly with what we put out in there. Had some extra family, second family. What's interesting about it is whenever you do those DNA results, is it'll identify to some degree what your family origin is, I guess you'd say, how it breaks up across racial categories and at the genetic level. When you do that, what you'll see is nobody, nothing. Everybody's all a mix of everything, right? And so this stuff's really, really fun. Actually, probably the most interesting thing from the biological side is what is it? Grandparent, parent, child. In 3 generations, you might have, just through random chance, it's entirely possible to have one of your grandparents not be represented at a genetic level at all, just through random, right? And so you start thinking about how those things move around. It's really, really interesting. Do they need their own category? They really do need their own category. That, in terms of, does it need its own separate question? The reason why they do that is so that way they can look at the cross effects between Hispanic plus all the other races. That way you get a better understanding of how the thing actually moves. At the flip side, you run into a lot of problems because it's this way. So how do you separate out, if you got a number for, give you an example, I want to say it was an OSBI. I did this for a number of years where they'd have, here's your number of whites, blacks, what was the next one? Probably Native Americans for this area. You'd say those of Asian, Pacific Islanders, right? You got a whole bunch of categories here. And then in a different section, here's your Hispanic and non-Hispanic, right? So if you got numbers across all of those, by the time you get over here, if it's a separate category, realize that if you're white and Hispanic, okay, what happens if you're white and non-Hispanic? You don't have a number for that. These numbers don't, they're not the same measure. So it's not like this number is strictly this or this number is strictly this. Same thing over here with any of these. So you don't get accurate numbers. You can get a measure for Hispanic overall, but you're getting it for people across all of these. And so when people start thinking about what it is to be Hispanic, as in, like, how would you say? First, second, third generation, like Hispanic, like maybe first generation literally just moved here. It's like they're, depending on the area they come from, it's like, yeah, well, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? This racial category, this racial category. And then our number for this one will be off too, because then this number won't purely represent whites. This number won't just, and so there's a way that you kind of blur numbers. So you have to be real careful about that. We talked about that a little bit in terms of one of the last chapters. This is another way you can do it, right? You can make the numbers obscure, make it to where it's a little harder to relate for people to see an accurate picture, because it's easier to do that sometimes. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes, they want to hide stuff. So you have to be careful with that. And identifying differences is easy. Would be another example of stuff that's like that. There's a lot of opportunities for stuff like that. Because you can't get an accurate number for either of those. You have this number over here. Let's say this number is 128, 120, and 8, right? And I've got we'll say 64 and 64 people here, right? So I've got 8 people who are non-Hispanic in this group. Are they white, black, both, neither? I can't tell, right? And so that's one of those problems, those things. Allows for other things, but if you don't have the right level of data, it stops you from pulling in what might actually be going on here. Like, let's say if there was an over enforcement of Hispanics and that kind of thing. And if we're talking about like white Hispanics, you can blur that number entirely by doing it here, right? Because this number will go up even though those who consider themselves white didn't actually have any change, but that number is going to go up because you're also adding these people in. Yeah, you play with the numbers a little bit. You gotta be careful with that. Sometimes it's good to do for simplicity's sake or because of the way the numbers flow. Or sometimes you have a choice. Sometimes they do it for this. You have to be careful. Yeah. Here it mentions major major groups. Americans, African Americans, Hispanics. It says here Native Americans, Asians, those types of groups. There's nothing really new. You know most of this information. I think I told you a little bit about probably the most interesting thing here is it mentions the fastest growing racial group along with Asian Americans, Hispanics. That's immigration. That's also numbers. You have to realize that those numbers, when they say fastest growing, if it's a smaller number to begin with, it doesn't take much change to create a bigger growth relative to that size. So it's like stopping Asian Americans, for example. It's like, how many of them are there? And realize if you're dealing in an area that only has, a few hundred, a birth rate where they've increased their numbers by, we'll say 10, it's like, you might be talking, a 5 to 10% increase in their size just from that. And so, yeah, it'd be really fast growing. It might not be significant. In terms of Hispanics, what we realize is if you look at the numbers, probably the most interesting look is census, because if you track the differences between 2020, 2010, and then 2000, what you'll see is population growth, and you'll see population starts to decline. And so if it weren't for immigration, we're actually considered net negative population growth, which is not good. And it's one that's like, it doesn't balance out across all categories. Some are stable. I almost say that I'm kind of talking off of memory because it's been a few months since I looked at those. It was like white group had the greatest decrease. I want to say something like 100,000 or 200,000 people, something like that. Black group it also decreased, but it wasn't quite as many because it wasn't as big as the group. But it had a decrease. I can't remember where these were stables, our Native American groups. But that Hispanic one was growing. And so you kind of see the nature of things there. Also kind of running tantamount to this, not tantamount, coinciding, simultaneously, somewhat related, but not the same things. You can't say tantamount, but somewhat associated with this is that urban versus rural environment. Because if I look at urban versus rural, yeah, you look at population and birth and that kind of stuff, we will see this population decreases in the urban areas and increases in the rural areas. Part of that's going to be COVID, part of that's going to be the nature of life itself, and part of that's going to overlap with this, right? Because you'll have, we have more Hispanic moving to rural areas, maybe a better way of life compared to where they were from, or maybe more ideal. It's like, I don't know. That would be complete conjecture, but if you look at that kind of thing, that's where you'll see those divergences. Is it an urban county, rural county? Okay. What counties are seeing what numbers go where? It's like rural counties will see greater increases in expanding populations. I want to say urban counties had increases in Black population, but across the board it was kind of declining. And then you can see how that's parsing out. So you got multiple things running at once. Here it mentions, let's see, Native Americans have their own tribal forces, high crime rate on reservations, that kind of thing. You do have some increases in crime. Of course, here, with marshals, right? That kind of thing. What was it? Was it in here that one of y'all mentioned the cross deputization? Like, I need to find out because I want to say that was in here. Someone mentioned to me that those. So what they do here for this state, because it's McGirt and all the Native American lands recognized as being Native American, but also we claim sovereignty over it. And so you have that conflict right there. So it's part of that with us right now is how we handle, I guess, our citizenry And it's how would you say, a patchwork kind of thing, where you have a lot of reciprocal agreements between the marshals and some of the local, what you say, police departments, counties, that kind of a thing. So you get cross deputizations. That way you can uh, still have the arrest authority you need to be able to govern the people here. And so there's some complexities here. Boom. It says Asian Americans. Here's what I'll talk a little bit about ethnocentrism as a term. Ethnocentrism. You know what it is, right? It's where whenever you encounter the world, you see it through your eyes. You are the way that you were raised is the way that you see things, right? It's one of the bigger things that we have in terms of like internal biases at the individual level. It's one way of looking at it, right? This kind of starts to identify this slide right here where it talks about Asian Americans and Arabians, Arabian Americans. It mentions here national origin, many different countries, different languages, diverse group, that kind of thing. Arab Americans, very diverse groups. I actually didn't know that. About 30% trace their back from Lebanon. I didn't know. But if you start dealing with that, or if you go back and you deal with, was it one last slide we were talking about African Americans, Hispanics, and those types of things, right? Those statements apply to all of those groups equally. It's like, you know, it's like dealing with, if we were dealing with, that's why I never know whether to say African American or just go black. It's like, have you ever met anyone who was an Aborigine from Australia? It's like, they're black. They're not African American. It's like, black. They're here in this country. Do we call them African Americans? If so, I don't think that they appreciate that kind of a thing. And so keep that in mind as well. We're dealing with something that is very, very diverse. You need to recognize that. Yeah, and so that applies across all groups. That's one of the things that makes, if you really start getting into cultural conflicts, the whether you're doing with like direct racism or anything like that, so interesting because it can move in so many different directions. It'd be like me telling you about what was it? Samoans versus Tongan, right? I've had friends who are both, right? My favorite thing to do with them is to, because both of them are from those areas. It's like, you know, I heard this guy over here was telling me that they're better at boating than you are. And you know, this is one of those things that because of their backgrounds, because of how they're it's like actually that's kind of offensive. Yeah, I'm gonna go, and so you can have a little bit of fun with them, and because you got to establish it's like, hey, I recognize the distinct groups here, not the same one. All right. Many public opinions about police. At first dot right there is probably the best one. It says there is no single community here. Yeah, that's not what we have. It's sort of like dealing with the majority versus minority, and noticing that majority keeps its frequency in society is kind of decreasing in its use. We start hearing this word plurality because it's there's so many different ways that we can fracture these things out that it's no longer more than half of people. It's just at all these different groups, this is the tallest one, and it doesn't go halfway. So it's like that's kind of different ways that police change policies for each group. It's going to be in things like with that crack cocaine, where it's you have a problem that's breaking out on the streets. How are we going to enforce it? To what degree? How are we going to treat it like a serious issue? If you go back to the 1990s, that's one of the things that they we say 90s kind of tumultuous time to say the least. It's not nearly as bad as other times in our history. But if you look at the ways that they interacted with crack cocaine, its onset in its communities here, and its over enforcement. It is one of those things where it's literally like, let me see, I'll show you this. Because it represents, you know, two sides. Any issue you have is going to have at least two sides. Secondly, it's got a third if you get this on one side. But two sides to that coin, right? You have the over enforcement of crack cocaine because we want to cause problems for this group. We do not like this group. It's seen as a social blight. Yes, you'll have people who take those opinions and who treat that group with more scrutiny, right? There'll be a little bit longer of a stop, a little bit more of an inquisition, a little bit more of a look inside to see if I can find anything, maybe, right? Same time. This one's kind of fun. How many public officials were pushing stricter punishments for crack cocaine? And when I say public officials, I don't just mean like mayors and things like that. I mean like district leaders too. And how many of those are going to be like district managers, I should say? How many of those are going to be of the same racial and cultural background as those experiencing the problem? Because they think that's how it helps, right? That's a very common thing. We're gonna increase the punishment associated with it so no one does it, right? And so you have people who are on both sides of that coin agreeing, right? Yeah, we need to enforce this one a little bit better, right? And so how we do it? Well, we can up the punishment so that people are less likely to do it. That's not how it works with drugs, right? And so it's really, really hard to deal with that. And then you have hindsight. What does it do? Did it do something bad? Everywhere you look, it did something bad. Whether it's people taking it, whether it's dealing with it, trying to deal with it. What was it? 3 weeks back, maybe a little bit longer, I told you the story about Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, right? Officer Perry Renfield, I'll remember his name because it was just, that story was too on point. It's sad. Lost his life in it. The reason why he lost his life is when he responded to a scene where it was a family encounter with someone firing off a rifle in the air. The person firing off the rifle in the air freaked out. The reason they freaked out is the person's father had overdosed on crack cocaine while in police custody and had a heart attack. He was fighting with the police as he did it, so the family blamed the police for fighting with him. Right? People do that all the time. Whether it's something like you have both sides of that coin. We want to stop people from using this horrible, horrible drug because of what it's going to do. So we're going to make it really, really serious drugs that don't take it. Or I just don't like this group. I'm going to punish them. And I'm going to make sure they don't take it because they gave me a reason. Those things align. And that's a problem to some degree. But how do you navigate it? In hindsight, if it does something negative, what we do, we usually just go back and people will ascribe it to whatever negative intent, and they'll completely overlook the positive. That's sort of like a good example would be driving down the road. You deal with an asshole driver, right? Someone cuts you off, runs a stoplight in front of you, or something like that. Most people get angry. You don't know where they're at, though, or what they're doing. Maybe you can tell. Sometimes you can tell right away. It's like that person's obviously on something, and they should not be on the road. Or it could be something like they're in a hurry to go to a hospital. Maybe they forgot to turn on their blinkers or something like that. You don't know. You can't ascribe intent to it, but people do it all the time. And we do it here with them en masse. And so it's really difficult to deal with. Right? Here it says public attitudes, that kind of thing. And it goes into racial aspects of it. It's like you start getting these minorities. Yes, they do not like the police as much. Part of that's going to be interactions. Part of that's going to be you can't necessarily separate it out from the majority versus minority type of thing, right? Majority has a greater sway on the rules, so they can make rules that are a bit more favorable to them, and by proxy, maybe less favorable to others. That's not benefiting me as a minority very much. I'm not going to be happy with that. Yeah, I'm not going to have a positive attitude about that. But if you look at it here, it says a majority of Americans have a positive attitude. That's because the nature of policing is people know they need help most of the time. No. Actually, now that I said it, I don't know if I can say that. Sometimes people know they need help, right? And when they're calling, they've recognized they need help and they've had to call. That's like dealing with these minority areas whenever we're having that massive defund the police movement. How many people's voices you couldn't hear because they were already being silenced, were screaming for the police all along the way because they're being terrorized, right? The police needs to community more justice by attacking the supply side drugs instead of demand side. You have to get both. Because if the demand's there, the supply's always going to find its way there. It's like prisons, right? It's the most secure environment in the entire world. Literally, the most secure environment you can find any drug you want. It's like, yeah, where there's a will, there's a way. And so you've got to manage both. It's better to get it on the supply side, though. But ideally, you can help your people out in here enough that they align a bit better. We have customers and they use roll on their supplies in exchange for leads. That's true. That's how you work it up, work up the ladder. I can't remember if it was in here or not that I mentioned something about that. No, somewhere I was talking about that recently. I was talking about basically when you roll over on somebody, turn someone over. Yeah, I like how you use roll because that's breaking the person rolled over. They rolled over on their friend. They gave over all the information, that kind of thing. Let's see. Where's consistent rate play with this, please? African Americans are not completely hostile. Yes, that's that other element. If you go back and you look at the fun police movement, at the same time, but not being, I don't know if it would be the promotion side of it, not because media makes money off of that. So it's really hard to say which side's actually more prevalent. You can look at the media and say, I can see the media, but that doesn't really matter. When you get into those neighborhoods, what you'll see is there are some divergences there, right? Some people were screaming very, very loudly. Whenever there were stuff going on there, it'd be like talking about how many people called for the police and how many times were people told that they're not coming, right? Because usually call police and okay, they'll be at some point. I'm going to take a long time to get really irritated about that. And stop and think about whenever you have big demonstrations, that kind of stuff ties up all the police. And so if there's a real thing going on, boom, there's no one there. So it's just you. People who've been in those situations, yeah, they'll be screaming for the police most of the time. They're some of the most biggest advocates for it. It'd be like talking about going into a minority neighborhood that's got problems with open air drug markets or any number of things. How many people in that neighborhood are in contact with police trying to work with them to get them a way to address it? It's not going to be zero, but it may not be enough to do anything about it. And that's the problem. Okay. Factors that affect public opinion. Everything. Here it says race and ethnicity. I don't know if there's really anything in here that's new on that slide. Sharp differences between whites and African Americans. Nearly twice as many African Americans have negative feelings towards the police as whites. Hispanics less positive than whites about not as negative. So they're in the middle ground. The talk in African American families is a tradition of having to talk with the children about how to deal with the police. I find that interesting because that's one of those that shouldn't be just like a racial thing. That should be across all groups, honestly. And if you look at it to some degree, I kind of want to think of that and be like, I don't know if that's an actual. I know it's a statement that sounds really, really good. A lot of people agree with it. But I'd also want to point out to all of the people who are in poverty who had that same talk with people because it's not the race thing, it's the poverty thing more than that. The race thing is a huge element, don't get me wrong. But the poverty element, good grief. That's the group of people that have that talk. That doesn't just stick to that one line. That one's a little bit irritant to me personally. Yeah. That was my reason. It's like, I don't exist as a person now. I'm an ass. I said I shouldn't talk like that. Because it is one of those things. It is a bit of a personal storefront because it overlooks all of society engaging in the same damn problem because we've attributed it to one group, so now you can just ignore the group. You can ignore the problem now, even though it spans more than just that. Here, age. 20% of people felt cold or somewhat cold for the police in their youth. As you get older, there's more positive feelings for it. So it's like you have that element of age. Part of that's going to be time, experiences, dealing with the difficult life, maybe opportunities to encounter experiences themselves that conflict with other things that they've been told. Maybe the integration of conflicting information is usually what it takes. That kind of thing. Young people have far more contact with police because they spend their time outside, and so that's that negative one where you start dealing with the youth interaction with police being much, much different than the older crowds interaction with police, because it is. Then goes into social class, right? If you make less than, it mentions arbitrary number there, confidence decreases. Why? Because you're encountering more problems. So you see that a little bit, right? Like, yeah, you came out 3 times to deal with this problem. It's still a problem. Yeah, it's going to be a problem forever, right? Attitudes about the police are very negative among some members. That's where it goes back into race across social class. We already talked about that. Quality of life, inner city variations. Basically, what you start dealing with is the city itself. The most interesting thing about cities, like they've got a lot of opportunities, a lot of resources that realize humans are those resources. Essentially, they're the ones that concentrate in those areas and what bring those resources there. As you deal with that, what do I want to say there? There's a lot to be said there. Maybe I'll just skip it. We went to Rodney King kind of stuff. We already talked a little bit about Rodney King, I think. If not, what you need to be aware of is 1991, 1992, right? It's Los Angeles, 1992. The event itself, I think, took place in 91. Officers, I always had trouble remembering whether they're even charged. I think they had charges dismissed or they weren't charged. I don't think that they got an acquittal. I don't think that they even got that far. And it's one where there's a video that lasts for minutes long of someone getting beaten. And it's not like a fight. If you're ever in a fight, it's like those things, they can last a long time, but it's not that one-sided, and it's not that nature of it there and the length of time there as one where it's like, if you're a fight, it's like, you wouldn't just keep going at that point. You'd have stopped a long time ago. Right? That person had been submitted. Let's see. So with that, the fact that there was no punishments associated with it, you have an entire group of people. I don't mean like racial group, I mean just an entire group of people like outraged. And you get this. You get a lot of violence that came out of it. That one was really, really interesting because you had with the rioting, you had looting, and then you had people who would respond on it. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there. But you can see the effects that just a singular incident can have. It can have lightning, right? Doesn't take long for you to look across the years between then and now to find a number of names that do the same kinds of things. Probably the thing that I would talk about most here is always trying to keep a neutral standpoint on any issues until you have as many of the facts as are available. And so you can make a solid determination. That's the really, really hard one. Like Rodney King, it doesn't take much to get there. Like you see that video, no, there's just no way that any of that is justifiable, right? And you can see that being a complete travesty. And when you see that, the feeling you get from it is like, okay, I understand those riots now, right? And the deaths associated. That's people. If you look at other names, some will give you that same effect, some will not. Some are ones that were lied about to give you that effect. If I said the name, was it Jacob Blake? Would be a good example of this, where you can see these controversial incidences. You'll have people, groups of people who will use that. They will seize upon it. I think the name was Jacob Blake. If you look it up, he was a guy who was shot in the back and paralyzed. I want to say shot in the back and paralyzed. What was happening in that instance? Before I tell you that, I'll talk about the social side of it. Caught so much attention for this person. The excessive use of force here. This person's name was on people's helmets in football. This person's name everywhere for a while. I want to say that it had some influence on politics. Like that person actually got to meet with political officials who gave them support, right? Why? The impact of these controversial incidences. However, when you look at the details of the case, you can see that it's far more gray than it is black or white or anything in between. It's not got anything to do with the racial stuff, really. And I don't mean that in terms of black and white, I mean in terms of right and wrong. Basically, what happened there is it's not necessarily excessive use of force. You look at it. What happened is you have a suspect who is getting into a vehicle, going for a large knife. He's disregarding authorities there in terms of their actions and stop and their commands. And he's trying to take off in a vehicle that's got a kid in it after sexually assaulting the woman who was inside, their parent. This person has their name on somebody's helmet, is getting national time with this. Why? That's not good. That's not good at all, right? And so you have a number of really weird things taking place in society. Probably the worst one about them lies. I mean, people lie a lot. That time. Next up, broader perspectives on police and society. So this is where we'll pick up next time. We go after the customer. Yeah, sorry. All right. Well, with that, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Hopefully you enjoyed this. We'll finish this chapter out next class, and then we'll move into the review for exam 3. With that, y'all have a great day. If you need anything, let me know, and I will talk to you all next time.